Hello, I'm John Avlon, author, journalist, historian, recent congressional candidate, and welcome to How to Fix It. The purpose of this podcast is to focus on finding solutions to the problems we face, not just endlessly fixating on problems. And one of the biggest challenges the United States have had is trying to make sure that we take a lead in high-speed rail. This is something that debuted in Japan in 1964. It's been the subject of a lot of plans for over 30 years, and yet very little real development and progress. And it's something that could be transformative on several levels. And that's why I was very struck by a new report out of the NYU Marron Center for Transit Cost that had a new proposal for high-speed rail, which would potentially dramatically cut the cost and offers a practical way forward in ways that seem to offer the potential of breaking the deadlock that we've seen in the United States to date. With me is Alon Levy of the NYU Marron Center, author of this report. Alon, welcome to How to Fix It.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me on here.
So I want to lay out some of the broad outlines and then have you explain it. First of all, this Northeast Corridor high-speed rail that you all propose would have basically just under 2 hours from New York to Boston, New York to Washington, the densest corridor, currently more or less where the Acela is. But what is truly differentiated in your plan isn't just the speed, it's the cost. You say this could be done for $12.5 billion in new infrastructure and roughly $4.5 billion in new trains. Just to put that comparison, that's compared to $117 billion that the Northeast Corridor Commission has asked for. And it's a lot less than other efforts like the North Atlantic Rail Initiative, which has been proposed, which would connect Long Island with New England by building a tunnel under the Long Island Sound. How did you develop this plan? How does it work?
So it works by not doing very long tunnels like a tunnel between Long Island and New Haven. Or more specifically, it works through building the minimal required infrastructure. I'm going to speak with a bunch of kind of slogans, kind of Swiss planning slogans. So one of them is called electronics before concrete, which is, it's really expensive to build tunnels, to build viaducts, to build, additional tracks in, constrained urban and suburban areas. Instead, you should build them, but only when you have to. So instead, you should try to timetable around them. So if you have a capacity bottleneck, you should try to timetable around it, to timetable the different trains better to squeeze more trains through this infrastructure. You should be investing in things like signaling and electrification to speed all the trains up before you build long 150, 200 or more miles an hour bypasses. This is because, well, Switzerland's a very wealthy country. So all of these things, sitting down and timetabling things better, or investing in better train sets, investing in better, I won't say in better electrical systems, but Switzerland is kind of unique in that it fully electrified its rail network in World War II. It was a very early adopter of electrification just because it has a lot of high hydropower reserves, and because of its position in both world wars, it could not rely on coal shipments from Germany, for example. But elsewhere, you would electrify. And the United States, unfortunately, is essentially the least electrified major railway network in the world. So you would invest in these before you do anything fancier. And then or another slogan is you have this triangle of planning where you plan in a triangle the infrastructure, the equipment that's going to use it, the train sets, and the timetable. And you do that, and you plan them in coordination. So, you know in advance what timetable you want, and then you build infrastructure based on it. One of the criticisms that I got about this plan was that, it has some high level overviews of things that need to happen, some policy issues, but also it has this extremely detailed list of potential timetables to a precision of less than a minute. And I was told, wait, you're not supposed to do this in a vision document for 10, 15, 20 years in the future. But here's the thing. When the Swiss go to referendum on a new piece of infrastructure, let's say it's a referendum on a new tunnel for a couple 100 million Swiss francs, the timetable will be there. They will say what timetable this enables. Because they're not building tunnels because they enjoy the underground underneath Lucerne or Zurich or any other Swiss city. They do this to enable specific improvements. And the same thing in Germany. The visioning documents in Germany include the potential timetables that they would like to run for every mainline train in Germany in the 2030s. It's these two slogans. It's the electronics before concrete slogan, and it's the triangle of infrastructure, rolling stock, and timetable.
So if I'm understanding correctly, those are issues of prioritization that allow you to sort of put the end in mind and focus on things that are essential for getting done rather than front loading the obstacles. But does that alleviate the need to deal with the infrastructure challenges that have held high-speed rail back in the Northeast?
No, it doesn't alleviate it. You still need to deal with these. So I put a budget, and the budget, forgetting the rolling stock for a moment, the infrastructure budget is $12.5 billion, which is a figure that in retrospect I kind of hate because it's kind of too precise. I mean, it could be 13, it could be 12, it could be...
We'll cut you some slack,
but yeah,
it's...
Yeah. But I mean, the point is, this is on top of things that have already been funded. And sometimes concrete is the solution. Sometimes you do need to build expensive things. So for example, the Gateway Tunnel between New York and New Jersey, I think the cost of it is inexplicably high. It's, the tunnel is, 16 billion, but the tunnel is very important for just raw capacity. They have more or less maximized the capacity of what can be done with such a branched system. So many commuter branches in New Jersey feeding into Penn Station. So yeah, that piece of infrastructure is necessary. And likewise, what our Fortune is proposing, it does propose some pretty expensive things. It just doesn't propose enough expensive things, and you layer them on top of each other, and you get to $100 billion. It's a couple billion here, a couple $100 million there, but it does not alleviate the need for any of this. And actually, quite a lot of what we're proposing is things that were already in the pipeline in the Biden administration. It was never top-down planning. It's not like the Biden administration ever said, this is a plan, you should build it. They said, we have money, the states can apply for it. Already Amtrak can apply for it. So, but some of the stuff that the states applied for and still have not gotten is in our plan. It was actually kind of, I don't want to get too political about this, but it was kind of annoying when when after the election I had to do some edits on the report as we were already in the process of writing it, and had to spin in, and I had to drop references to certain projects that I wanted to say about them. They're probably going to get funded very soon with BIL funds, and probably that's not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think Biden was famously a rail enthusiast, but so
exactly.
was Bill Clinton, so was Barack Obama, and nothing's gotten done. The California High-Speed Rail Initiative is famously a boondoggle. Why this inability to execute, and how does your plan bypass those roadblocks, if that's the right term, those bureaucratic obstacles?
So actually, we have a better report than mine. Mine is a how-to, but we have a different report that we did that we did before about so you want to do a high-speed rail project, which is a much higher altitude look at things with some things that you need to do institutionally to build high-speed rail. And we were talking a bunch of California. I mean, we're not as negative about it, but California did make a lot of mistakes. They committed to big things too early. They made certain political promises to certain areas that they would get expensive infrastructure, that they wouldn't get this infrastructure that they thought was a negative impact. And they did it before they did enough engineering to know what the optimal alignment was. So that wasted billions of dollars. They did not have any in-house capacity for this. And one of the things that I'm saying is that they need to do this coordinated body, including all the commuter railways and Amtrak, and actually have one coordinated plan rather than each one applying for something and therefore evaluating them separately. So you do need more active government for this than just saying yes or no to grants without any overarching plan, because the current overarching plan, essentially, they asked Amtrak, what do you want? And Amtrak said, we have difficult relationships with the commuter trains. Can you get them out of our hair? And then the commuter railways say, we have a difficult relationship with Amtrak. Can you get them out of our hair? So, they, sometimes want a lot of extra multi-tracking projects just for separate Amtrak and commuter rail, tracks, which aren't always necessary.
This is sort of in the spirit of getting back building again. This sort of says that the grant model is often diverted to side projects for political purposes, and this would be more streamlined, no pun intended. But
yes.
how?
It's not just political.
But how does it work? You know, with is this used? Does this builds on Amtrak, but it's not through Amtrak? You've got to work with various existing governors. You know, what's the actual mechanism? Brightline, which is not a true high-speed rail, but is held up as an example of something in the United States that works, is private on existing railways. This is not that. So what's the mechanism to bypass some of the bureaucracy and lower the cost to actually get this done?
So the mechanism is, honestly, you can use Amtrak. I mean, I'm assuming Amtrak's going to run the service. It's not something that's very easy to privatize, because usually when you privatize service with the Brightline model is one example. Europe sometimes does this on certain tracks. It's usually when you very loosely plan things. So you don't have this kind of tight planning of the infrastructure and the timetable. In Switzerland, it's not privatized. Or rather, there are peripheral elements that are, but the main network is not. And Switzerland is a country that otherwise is rather privatized. The taxes there are lower than in most of the rest of Europe, or the healthcare system there is one of the most privatized in the developed world. I think the US is maybe the only more privatized one, but they still retain this planning capacity, which is part of the national railway. Probably the most important thing is to actually recognize that the US has a problem and needs to, I mean, in the report, we talk a lot about German, and Swiss, maybe Dutch planning mechanisms. So that would be something like just knowing how Germany works and how the US can have what Germany, what the Netherlands, what, Sweden, what Switzerland has. And this actually gets pretty difficult. There's a lot of resistance to learning from other countries in the US in general. In railways, especially, the railroads are, I think, kind of atypically siloed from the rest of the world. The main rail technology conferences in the world are not in the US, and Americans almost never show up. I actually know a Long Island Railroad advocate, Patrick Hara, who visited Berlin for InnoTrans last year, and people were teasing him when he said that he's from the US, and they said, wait, are you sure you got to the right place?
Well, that's not a great boost of confidence, but I understand why.
Exactly.
Well, and the LIR is a particularly complex case. And by the way, Governor Rockefeller had a proposal to connect high-speed rail Manhattan with Riverhead, which I think would be transformative for Long Island. But I'm speaking with a local rooting interest.
Yeah, and Long Island has, for many generations, have this kind of dynamic where the riders really hate the railroad. They think it's really poorly run, but they hate it in a sense of, in a kind of local loyalty sense. If said, okay, you guys think that the LIR is poorly run? Great, let's run it like the Munich S-Bahn, and they will take it as a threat. And the Munich S-Bahn is very well run. It has very good infrastructure. They're building more at exceptionally high costs for reasons that I don't want to get into. It's kind of the similar social dynamic where people in the suburbs of New York often view the city as kind of dirty, and it's rather similar in the suburbs of Munich. But the Munich S-Bahn is really modern and kind of invented some of the principles that I'm using for the Northeast Corridor report.
This is so dramatically different in terms of the cost assessment and the speed of the trains and how quickly the trains go every 10 minutes in your proposal, that it almost sounds like a pipe dream. So, who are the figures? Have you spoken to governors about getting this done? Because I mean, this is as close to a win-win high-speed rail proposal as I've seen, but it almost seems like science fiction given the cost and difficulty of getting anything done in the United States today.
I've not talked to governors or to staffers for governors. I've talked to some congressional staffers, and they seemed somewhat interested. Kind of a wait and see whether the funding environment improves. I'm not enough of a DC insider, and I don't know enough DC insiders to know whether it is likely to improve. But part of it, I guess the problem is that you need a lot of people to be kind of in on the program. And I think it is possible just because of, as you mentioned, there is a win-win there. Even places that are maybe you would think are losers because maybe if they lose an express train and have to get on a local train, often get a local train that is faster than the express trains are today. But it does require this kind of leap of faith and this kind of understanding that this is a genuinely better way of timetabling. It's just really difficult to do this when essentially the realm of the possible often in this kind of policy sphere is only, the Boston, Seattle, San Diego, Miami quadrilateral.
What we often hear is that the reason the Acela isn't true high-speed rail is that the right-of-ways are such that you don't have enough straightaways to hit maximum speeds.
Kind of. And I emphasize kind of because within the existing right-of-way between New York and New Haven, this is currently the slowest section of the Northeast Corridor. It is not even the curviest. It is the slowest because of really poor timetabling and relationships between Metro North and Amtrak. The line is curvy. Don't get me wrong. The speed that I'm proposing, it's New York to Boston in about 2 hours, New York to DC in about 2 hours. This is not a very impressive speed. This is an average speed that is substantially lower than in, let's say, Japan, France, Spain, let alone China. It's maybe a German speed, and Germany also has long stretches that are not very fast. New York to New Haven is also the slowest section of what we're proposing. It's a stretch of about 70 miles. And today, Amtrak does it in somewhat more than an hour and a half, and Metro North in about 2 hours. You can do it in about an hour on current infrastructure with no changes to infrastructure. You just change how you're running the trains. And then for the commuter trains, it could be done in an hour 20 something. Governor Lamar actually had this plan until he was told that it can't be done, called 30-30-30, but it can be done. And a lot of it just involves getting rid of kind of paradigms that Metro North and in Connecticut DOT has convinced themselves are absolutely necessary for running trains, and they're not. Such as each suburb gets its own dedicated express train. So right now, the New Haven line is the busiest commuter line in the United States. There are running from the New Haven line to Grand Central 20 trains at the peak hour today, 20 trains in 1 hour getting into Grand Central. 4 of them are in branches, 16 are on the main line, and these 16 trains have 13 different stopping patterns because each stretch of, let's say, 3 stations gets a train that stops at these 3 stations and then expresses to Grand Central on the idea that this is the fastest way possible and the most efficient way to just get suburban 9 to 5 commuters into the city. It was invented in the 60s, kind of like focusing on this kind of Don Draper, or Pete Campbell from it's 9 to 5 commuter rail, the 9 to 5 suburban commuter market. And the problem is this is a really complex way of timetabling things. And, over time, you end up having to slow down the trains, even they're all express trains, but you need to slow them down just because, one delay will make 10 trains behind you also delayed. And the result is that the technical travel time is, I don't remember the number, but let's call it X. The actual travel time on this Metro North line is about 30% more than that. So you need to add about 30% just for timetable padding. And to be clear, so they don't add 30%, that's 7%. Or they also, there are maintenance practices, and that's a very Metro North specific thing. The rest of the NEC is maintained much better. They have kind of antiquated maintenance practices, and the result is that they just have a blanket 70 miles an hour speed limit, on a line where nearly every curve is good enough for 95. So the result is that, yes, it's a curvy line, but it's a curvy line where trains could be doing 90, 95, 100, 105, 110 miles an hour. And instead they're restricted to 70. And on top of that, they also are required to, slow down even further because of all this timetable padding, because of this mentality that each station or each short group of stations needs its own trains rather than running, long trains. Maybe do a local run from Stanford to New York and then a train that runs from New Haven to Stanford and then runs express to New York. It's how it's currently done off-peak, but at rush hour, they try to be clever. Instead of doing these 2 sections, they do something like 7 sections. Which in the 60s looked like a good idea. It isn't. A lot of it is just random ideas from the 60s that have never been modernized.
First of all, just to reiterate, this is a cost differential of almost 10 to 1 from what's been proposed previously in the by the Northeast Corridor Commission. It is done in conjunction with Amtrak, presumably. There is not some new infrastructure, but that's not the primary focus. It's timetabling and technology. And would the money go through the federal government, Congress, or would it go, because again, if it's 1/10 the previous estimated cost, even Republicans might get behind that, or does it go through the governors, or jurisdictionally it has to do both?
I assume it has to be FRA approved. A few things can be done at the state level because of benefits to state commuter rail agencies. For example, some of the 12.5 billion is certain commuter rail improvements, things like electrifying lines that are currently running diesel, even on the electrified Northeast Corridor, where they run diesel locomotives under the catenary between Baltimore and Washington, between Boston and Providence and point south of Providence in Rhode Island. And so it's things like getting them modern electric trains, maybe wiring some branches that are unelectrified, investing in the station. So a lot of it is speeding up the commuter trains so that Amtrak doesn't get stuck behind them. The Northeast Corridor today in Rhode Island and Massachusetts is already very fast. To the extent it's not as fast as it can be, it's because commuter trains slow down the commuter trains are so slow, they slow down the intercity trains behind them. So it's things like investing in an overtake section. This is actually something that's already in the plan. It's just not considered a priority, but it should be between Reedville and Route 128. Things like, again, speeding up the commuter trains so that today Boston to Providence commuter trains do the trip in about an hour 10. They should be able to do the trip in less than 50 minutes. And so if you speed them up this way, this is investment that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts can do itself.
Got it.
It is eventually going to get there. It's just not considered a priority there for some Massachusetts internal reasons, unfortunately. Or maybe you fix some junction in New Jersey or in the suburbs of New York, in New York State. This is something that could be done state off. So some of the 12.5 could be done by state governments just for benefits to commuter rail. I'm going to make up a number, which is about half the funding could be done state level without federal involvement, but the other half would require federal.
I encourage you to reach out to Governor Lamont and vice versa, and Governor Murphy of New Jersey and Governor Healy in Massachusetts, because what you're speaking has sometimes the cumulative effect of small things can have big impacts, and that's partly what you're saying. I wonder if you look more broadly, have you looked at other, proposed high-speed rail? Seth Moulton, congressman from Massachusetts, has been advocating has spoken about the potential of Boston to Chicago, which would be transformative, for example, to upstate New York, and cities like Syracuse and Utica and Buffalo and even Cleveland and Ohio, or Long Island rooting interest here, or what are some of the other areas where you think high-speed rail really could be transformative and achievable?
It's a good question. So I have spoken to Congressman Moulton's staff on this. I think it's kind of consensus that you want to start with the Northeast Corridor because other lines could be very successful, but first of all, they're going to be more expensive. The Northeast Corridor, as I said, if you take 12.5 billion and divide by the length, it's going to look extremely cheap. but that's because most of this is just on the pre-existing line rather than building new lines. And essentially everywhere else, except maybe Philadelphia to Harrisburg or maybe parts of New York to Albany, you need an entirely new line if you want high-speed rail. You could do things on the existing tracks, but they're not going to be this fast. They're going to be these, average speed, let's say 70 mile an hour lines that high-speed trains have replaced in the last 40 years in Europe, or they replaced in Japan, they're replacing in China. I mean, there are going to be hundreds of billions unless you're building many, many different lines. I mean, it's okay to spend hundreds of billions of dollars if you're building not Boston to Washington, but let's call it Boston to Miami and New York and Philadelphia to Chicago and Chicago to Atlanta. I mean,
well, yeah, let's walk before we can run.
Yeah, exactly. So all of these, it's something that I think would be successful, but as you said, walk before you run, and kind of Boston to Washington is the walk, and then you can do probably the easiest thing to do on top of Boston to Washington is things that are very easy extensions or branches. So that would be things like investing in Virginia. Already, they're spending quite a lot of money on passenger-only tracks from Washington to Alexandria, because right now they're shared with CSX, which which demand priority. It's an important freight leg for it, the Long Bridge.
Final question for you is, one thing that gets mentioned sometimes is using the median of highways, because they tend to be straightaways.
They're usually not.
I understand there are hurdles to that. It might be conceptually clean, but it's not as practically accessible.
So highway medians are not usually good for this, because highways and trains can fundamentally round the same curve cars and trains can round the same curve at the same speed. The interstates are built for 70 to 75 miles an hour. Maybe some newer ones are built to slightly more, but we're talking 80, 85, not anything more than 100. So if you're in an area that's just extremely flat, then maybe the highway will be atypically straight. I think Florida high-speed train, not to Brightline, but the previous plan from Orlando to Tampa was supposed to go in the median of I-4. But that was designed for it in the start, and it's Florida, which is extremely flat. Basically everywhere else, the interstates will take small curves that are fine if you're a 75 miles an hour car, and are not fine if you're a 150 or 200 miles an hour train. So often what happens is you twin with a highway. So you're going to go on one side of the freeway. We are proposing that for the long bypass in southeastern Connecticut and high-speed rail airport, where you're going to go, for us, it's north of I-95. So you need to take slightly different curves. There's going to be some land acquisition, but much less. And it's usually land that's already freeway adjacent. So it's probably not going to be someone's cherished home. It might be an occasional logistical business that's kind of freeway adjacent warehouse where the owner has an MBA and understands that they could just sell and get their own on the other side of the freeway or something with the money. And so you do not want to use the medians. You would often want to use one side with slightly different curves.
Okay. Well, look, again, the headline is, this is an extraordinary report that you wrote with the NYU Marron Center Transit Cost Project. It proposes that you are able to, for $12 billion in infrastructure, roughly $4.5 billion in new trains, roughly 10th the cost of previous proposals, get from New York to Washington, New York to Boston in under 2 hours, with trains leaving every 10 minutes. It's an exciting proposal. And, I hope people in positions of power are listening, and more importantly, that you're reaching out and making them listen, because we got to get back building again. Alon Levy, thanks for joining us on How to Fix It.